watching the sky, sir. It's doing some amazing things. It's got everything. Reds, greens, kind of shimmering, and it just went red all over!
If you told me I could only keep one film I've ever produced, the film I'd want to hang on to would be Local Hero.
Do you think that I'd out there?
It changed the course of my whole life, so it was a very, very special experience for me.
Kisu.
Kisu?
I think it's as near to perfect a film as you can be involved in.
Olsen, I could grow to love this place.
It's a difficult thing for people to realise just how exciting that was, to have Burt Lancaster on a beach in Scotland.
Statue McIntyre?
Aye, Ricky's on the road tonight. You got to look both ways.
It's like in top 10 films, not just in Great Britain, it's like an international kind of top 10 films.
It's mysterious. It is quite magical, actually.
We're going to sell this hotel.
The length of time it stayed with people, that for me was more of a benchmark than anything.
The spirit that film was made in, if you could bottle that, Jesus, world would be a lovely place.
Local Hero was the movie that asked the materialistic, money-obsessed 1980s to take a long, hard look at itself.
That's where the jetty will be. And the storage tank's over here, all the way up. It's just like the model, doesn't it?
The story sees a Scottish fishing village seduced by the big bucks of an American oil company, but ultimately forced to confront the potential cost of getting rich quick. And behind the scenes, there was a struggle for the movie's soul between a Hollywood studio and two of British cinema's brightest talents.
I was very privileged to be able to have got to know my own country when I was fairly young, and then to use it in a way that was quite meaningful for me.
It was the point in my life where I was at my very best as a producer. I know it. I trusted my instincts, as I said. I was good, briefly.
When Local Hero was released in 1983, the partnership between award-winning producer David Puttnam and acclaimed writer-director Bill Forsyth seemed a perfect match. In fact, their first date had happened 4 years earlier.
I've never had this experience before. I watched That Sinking Feeling, and within 3 minutes of it starting, I knew I wanted to work with him. I mean, I just knew that this was a really original mind.
What did we do with ourselves? Well, for a start, was my O-levels. 2. Now there's a fair advantage, you might say.
And he pulls back and he's talking to the statue in the park. I thought, hang on, anyone that's had that idea, I want to work with. I want some of that.
That Sinking Feeling, made in 1979, shot on spare ends of discarded film stock with a cast of unknowns from the Glasgow Youth Theatre, was Bill Forsyth's first foray into movies after his early years making corporate documentaries. When Bill was looking for a producer for his next project, David Puttnam seemed the obvious choice.
He'd asked me to produce Gregory's Girl, which, foolishly, I turned down, simply because I'd done a number of rites of passage movies. But I did have this idea. I'd read in a newspaper article about a local accountant in the islands who had sued an oil company for spillage.
At that time, in the late 70s, early 80s, Aberdeen, was oil town, was frontier town. It was full of Americans because Scotland had no history in the oil business, and so everyone that was working in it was American.
When his research threw up more stories of the culture clash between Texas and Tannock Brae, Bill Forsyth sensed the comic possibilities.
What I did was slightly subvert it and take it away from the actual nuts and bolts of the oil industry and place it in a little corner of Scotland and look into the consequences of the oil industry being there rather than, the oil industry itself.
Bill's story for Local Hero revolves around an executive at Knox Oil and Gas in Houston, chosen to go to Scotland to acquire a site for a new refinery, purely because of his name.
McIntyre, sir.
Keeping his Hungarian roots quiet, he's summoned to see the boss, stargazer Felix Happer.
You're going to Scotland, McIntyre. The old country.
Yes, sir.
Virgo is well up this time of the year.
Funnily enough, I had read an article, an interview with Burt Lancaster, where he said that his one regret in his career up to that point was that he hadn't been involved in more comedy. And that kind of triggered something in me. And so from that point on, I was actually writing for him.
Lancaster was a long shot, but there'd be absolutely no chance of getting him without a Hollywood-sized budget. Warner Brothers had first refusal on all David Puttnam's projects, and in 1981 he seemed a safe bet after working with new directors like Ridley Scott, Alan Parker and Hugh Hudson, director of the recently released Chariots of Fire.
I'd had a real run of success with Midnight Express and Chariots, and I just thought it was a slam dunk when I took Local Hero to show them, and they turned it down.
I think it's fair to say that Warner didn't understand it and weren't particularly enthusiastic. Bill didn't have a particular track record at that time. I think initially Gregory's Girl hadn't really dawned on their radar screen.
Ian Smith had worked with both Bill and David as location manager on Chariots of Fire and production manager on Bill's earlier documentaries. With Warner's having passed on Local Hero, Puttnam's biggest hope for funding had gone, and getting Burt Lancaster on board would take a miracle. Cue miracle.
It was a combination of circumstances. Lancaster was over for a BAFTA, and David was BAFTA laden that year with Chariots of Fire.
David Puttnam for Chariots of Fire.
And the most extraordinary thing happened. As I collected my BAFTA and walked back to my table, I passed the Goldcrest table, and a man called James Lee stopped me on the way back to my table and said, Local Hero, you still want to do it? I said, yes. He said, you've got the rest of the money. Congratulations. Shook hands, went back to my table, and he was as good as his word.
So it was perfect. It all happened in one night.
That night put £3 million in the Local Hero bank account, and Burt Lancaster in its sights. Lancaster loved the idiosyncratic script, and after seeing Bill collect a BAFTA for Gregory's Girl and then David lift an Oscar for Chariots, he was prepared at the age of 70 to delay his retirement. But genuine Hollywood stars don't come cheap, and David had little room for manoeuvre.
At no point did we have a conversation about any other actor at all. So my job was made simple and difficult. I was negotiating with the only person Bill wanted who wouldn't budge their budget price to a rock and a hard place.
The mere mention that Lancaster might be involved with the movie saw Warner Brothers come running back offering a US distribution deal. This put Bill Forsyth under a commercial pressure he hadn't experienced on That Sinking Feeling or Gregory's Girl. For the film's financial security, both Warner's and Goldcrest felt another big Hollywood name should be cast in the central role of Mac. With Bill backing the little-known Peter Riegert, the studios pushed Puttnam to cast Happy Days star Henry Winkler.
My impression was that Henry at one point was extremely keen. I remember us meeting in the office, really sucking our teeth, saying, when on one hand it secures the movie, on the other hand, is it right? Is it actually tonally what we want for the film?
And I said, look, Bill, I understand that you want me to do this, but I also understand the politics of Hollywood, and, you know, the fact that you want me means a lot to me, but I'll understand if something terrible happens. He said something along the lines of, look, I wrote it and I'm directing it. If you're not in it, there's no movie.
Peter was just right. He had the right manner. He had a lovely sense of humour, very, very self-effacing. He just felt right.
Bill's high-stake approach to negotiations saw him get his man. Peter Riegert was cast as Mac, the American oil man who has some high-stakes negotiations ahead of him when he arrives in the fictional West Coast village of Furness. He's met by Danny, a representative of the company's local office, played by a very inexperienced Peter Capaldi.
I didn't have a clue. I really had no idea how you did this. I didn't know what you did.
Sorry.
He asked me if I wanted to be in a film, and I said, well, what did you say? Yeah, of course. I mean, who'd say no? But I had no idea that it was going to be on this scale.
Bill had spotted Capaldi at a party in Glasgow. At the time, his CV included pop musician, graphic designer and stand-up comedian. Bill thought with a bit of direction he could add actor to that list.
Well, they want some whiskey, and Ben wants some beef sandwiches with mustard and no salt.
Don't act. That's what I remember him saying, because obviously I would throw myself with great enthusiasm into these scenes, not having a clue. I can remember Peter Riegert and I are walking down a hotel, it's in the morning, and I walk past the camera pans round with us, and I took it upon myself to tell the audience that it was the morning by doing a big yawn, just as like that as we passed the camera. Billy, what are you doing? What's that? What do you mean? And I said, well, tell them it's morning. They know it's the morning, we've got a shot of the sun coming up, you know.
It was the part that needed a first-timer. It was the part that, had there been a familiar face in there, it would have diminished the effect. And we wanted that gawky kind of searching rightness thing that he had.
I don't think I had any capacity to act. I think I was just a bit of a twat.
Bill had gained confidence in working with inexperienced actors on That Sinking Feeling and Gregory's Girl, creating characters from the streets of real-life modern Scotland. David was more inspired by Scotland's movie past. He saw a gap in the market for films that harked back to the gentle comedies of the 40s and 50s.
There's been part of me that's always, in a sense, been remaking the films of my youth. Does that make sense? In the way Chariots of Fire is. I'm not a modern, I never was really, a modern filmmaker.
I knew Bill certainly was not interested in telling a sentimental version of what Scotland was. He's got his own pride about what it is to be Scottish, and it wasn't Brigadoon. It wasn't going to be bagpipes and kilts for Bill.
We have to talk to a Mr. Riegert, an accountant. Can you tell me where we might find him?
Indeed, yes. He has an office right next door, to the left on the first floor. I know for a fact he'll be there in about 15 minutes.
In the Highlands in those days anyway, everyone needed 2 or 3 jobs.
We tend to double up on jobs around here. I'm a taxi driver sometimes too. See that?
It's just the way people lived. OK, it's a comic device, but it's also based on some kind of reality as well.
Playing a Scottish character who just didn't try, who was really cool and smart. It was just great to do that.
Whichever hat he's wearing, Gordon Urquhart and his wife Stella stand to make a fortune from the sale of Furness.
I think she's a bit of a male fantasy, actually.
Stella.
You know, she could cook a good rabbit stew, and she could also. What time does this go out at night?
Okay, I'll get you.
After whipping the villagers up into a greedy frenzy, Gordon plays a coy and canny game with Mac.
We have to be talking about millions.
He isn't about to let a Yank put one over on him.
Maybe.
With the lead roles taken, Burt Lancaster's fee notwithstanding, the studios now sat back and let Bill and David cast the smaller parts. A company of experienced Scottish character actors was assembled to people Furness, and they were suitably believable.
Would they be wanting to buy a boat too, Mr. Urquhart?
Gideon, if things go well, they'll have to buy their own shirts back off us this time next week.
The local residents behave exactly as you would expect local residents to do. You know, they sniff the money and they start planning on where they're going to go and live with it and what cars they're going to buy.
I wonder what the poor people are doing tonight.
Classic 80s people, you know, grab the money and run. Only Ben on the beach. Only Ben is the holdout. You know, Ben actually sees a different form of value, uses the word value differently.
Old Ben the beachcomber owned a crucial strip of sand which becomes the barrier between the villagers and their millions. He alone, it seems, is able to see beyond the dazzle of the dollar, because Ben is only interested in preserving his home and way of life.
The scene on the beach between Ben and McIntyre with the grains of sand, that to me, I suppose, is the heart of the film.
He picks up some sand and says,
"Would you give me a £1 note for every grain of sand I hold in my hand?"
And I think he's conning me, because I think there's millions and millions of grains of sand. And a couple of the grains fell through his fingertips.
Saved you a £1 or £2, eh?
You know, it wasn't planned that way. And I was in my character, and I just stayed with it. And he was that good of an actor, and Bill was that wise a director to know that these things are what you pray for.
You could have had a very nice purchase there, Mr. McIntyre. I can't hold much more than 10,000 grains of sand in my hand at a time. Did you think it would be a bigger number?
Since becoming famous as Mr. Mackay in Porridge, work on stage and TV had kept Fulton Mackay busy, and he jumped at the chance to make a film, especially in Scotland.
For Fulton, it was very much like coming home. I mean, that sense of being rooted in time and place is something that Fulton actually really appreciated.
What the film's about is the discontinuity between what man is able to do or believes themselves entitled to do to a landscape and what the landscape itself requires.
Local Hero addresses some very central issues for Scotland. The villagers are willing themselves into self-destruction. There's a line one of the villagers says, which is, we will have nowhere to call home, but we'll all be stinking rich. And Bill is pointing to that and saying, what kind of country do we want to have?
If you got the place, it would be goodbye beach forever, wouldn't it?
Furness Beach was possibly the most important piece of casting in the film. It had to be idyllic and irreplaceable, and it also needed to be next to a picture postcard village. But did the place in Bill Forsyth's imagination actually exist?
We thought we knew Furness, and to our horror, when we actually went out there and started to look for this village and the beach, we couldn't find it.
And they said, you'll have to film them in separate locations. And I said, I can't do this. I really can't do it.
The day when we finally came to crunch in Pennon, we literally sat it out while Bill walked up and down, up and down, up and down. He was having a hell of a day. And, we refused basically to leave until he decided.
He finally gave me an ultimatum and said, you've got 6 o'clock to decide whether you're going to make this film or not. And it was only going to happen if these two come together. So that's what we did. The beach and the village are about 100 miles apart.
The beach is local heroes' battleground, scene of the heroic last stand for the things that money can't buy. Where better for the movie star only money could buy to touch down in Scotland. Burt Lancaster's fee had been agreed just days before shooting started. So after 6 months of negotiation, how far had David Puttnam persuaded Burt Lancaster to drop his fee?
The bugger would never, ever, ever break his price. We ended up paying him the price they quoted on the very first meeting. I spent 6 months, I tried every single thing I knew. So with huge reluctance, $2 million. I mean, $2 million was a third of the budget, I think, from memory. Before shooting, Warner Brothers, who were going to be the distributors in the US, turned around and made a US television sale to NBC for 2.2. He paid for himself. The day he arrived, we were $200,000 in profit. And I learned a very powerful thing about stars, that they're not a cost, they're an asset.
This is just an informal visit.
There was a wonderful moment. Mick Coulter, whose first feature film it was the operator, I always remember we did the shot and the second take was perfect. And Mick turned around and he said, shit, he said, I got Burt Lancaster from my viewfinder. This is a real movie.
He said, I like to rehearse. I need to rehearse because there's always one scene. I always fuck it up. And I said, oh, well, which scene is it in this movie, Burt? And he said, that's the trouble. I'd never know.
I mean, I'd heard swearing, obviously, from Glasgow, but the Americans have a particular way of swearing.
I'm getting too old for this shit.
He said, I gotta tell you, kid, your instinct is fabulous. You got fabulous instinct. Can't understand a fucking word you say, but your instinct's fantastic.
I like this place. The air is good, clear.
And he was Burt Lancaster. I just couldn't get over that. He was Burt Lancaster. He was Burt Lancaster. He wasn't someone pretending to be him, or he wasn't Frank Gorshin doing an impression. It was Burt Lancaster.
All right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk this way, and then when I get a certain distance, I'll gesture this way to the sky, and then perhaps I'll look forward, and then I'll lean this way, and I'll bring the boys along with me that way. And he went on for a couple of minutes. So Bill says, I think a little bit less. And that basically was how Bill spoke to Burt.
Bill's experience with the Glasgow Youth Theatre had taught him that encouraging his actors to underplay would be the best way to keep it real.
I said to him, nothing, right? Meaning nothing, anything, but I mean just in the eyes. I said, nothing, right? And he said, less than nothing. He's not suggesting anything. He's just letting you, the audience, be as confused as the characters are.
Once filming was underway, the studio's attention focused on the rushes at the end of the day's work. How would the movie's backers react to what their relatively inexperienced director was doing with their cash?
Bill and myself and David, some Warner Brothers people maybe, there were a handful of people. We saw the dailies, what we had shot.
Action.
Now, not much is happening, and I'm not really doing much. And it was really clear to me. I could hear a little concern.
Cut.
Okay. What's going on with this guy? He's not doing anything. And to Bill's credit, and to certainly David's credit, they were reassuring of everybody else who seemed to be slightly hysterical.
To my mind, all you have to do with an actor is just to give them an idea of the setting. You know, they're coming with their, obviously, take on things, but you just have to present your version of the reality that you're trying to create in as simple a way as possible.
Besides Bill's trademark use of underplaying, there were observational touches that added to the distinctive flavour of local hero. Under the red helmet of Ricky was the star of That Sinking Feeling and Gregory's Girl, John Gordon Sinclair.
I think it was to make up for how little I made on Gregory's Girl. He was feeling a bit guilty. So I wasn't actually supposed to be in it, really. He just said, come up and hang out and have the summer up in Scotland. And Ricky was really Bill's little signature in the film. It's very typical of those sort of little villages up in the west coast of Scotland where, there's one street. And it always seems that any time you step outside the door, the one motorcycle comes flying past you.
I think a lot of the comic devices in Local Hero are actually, once again, based on reality. I mean, it's quite easy to, if you go into something and you're looking for comedy, you can find it there, in the situation.
Are you sure there are 2 L's in dollar, Gideon? Yes. And now there are 2 G's in bugger off.
If Bill's story was showing a growing tension between the villagers, that wasn't what was happening among his cast and crew.
I was having the experience McIntyre was having.
We had the most wonderful time together. We were out every night together as a company.
It's like living a life. It's like you start your life at the beginning of the filming and you go through this whole range of emotions with people, and then at the end of it, everyone dies. And so it's like an entire life encapsulated in 12 weeks.
There was one person on the unit who really didn't enjoy it at all, and that was Bill. We never saw Bill. He was the one person missing. We'd have liked to have been there because we all loved him. But he was always back in his hotel room working on the next day's shots and making sure the dialogue was there and all the rest of it.
It was a tough shoot for me. It was a big shoot. And I was conscious of the fact that we were spending quite a lot of money for me in those days anyway.
It was as good as it could have been for Bill, because he was surrounded by a lot of people who loved him and knew him and understood his oddity and protected him as well.
The charms and wiles of Furness were working their magic on Mac too. After a few days, he goes native and his hard business exterior begins to crumble. He stops shaving and even takes up a spot of beachcombing. Not only that, but he falls under the spell of Gordon's highly desirable wife, Stella. Danny also finds a new purpose in life in the shape of Marina, the enchanting marine biologist played by Jenny Seagrove.
It was my first feature film. I was terribly excited, and we had wonderful Penny who did the costumes, and she sent me to Champneys for a week because she knew I was going to have to look good in a swimming costume, and I thought, wow, is this how they treat you on the movies, It was so exciting.
She's got a magnificent pair of lungs.
I can't tell you how many retakes we did on that. I was all right. I'm quite good for not corpsing. But the 2 Peters cracked up, and I mean really cracked up, every time I said that line in that daft wee Alistair voice. She's got a magnificent pair of lungs.
Oh, yes. A great asset.
And eventually, Bill Forsyth said, right, said you two to the 2 Peters. He said, out, just get out. So I had to do the line in isolation. I don't know what I was looking at. I can't remember what I was looking at, but it wasn't the 2 Peters when I said it. They're not there. They couldn't be.
Actually, she's better in the field.
The first time you see me is with a model of the shoreline of Furness. And I just thought, these guys are just kids. They're playing in puddles with wave machines and things like that, but they're making wee models and rowing in daft wee boats.
Will Marina be back?
In Bill Forsyth's fertile imagination, men are often boys and women frequently otherworldly who run rings round the lads in Gregory's Girl and bamboozle and enchant them in Local Hero. Both Stella the heavenly body and Marina the girl from the sea are constant and unwavering. The guys don't really stand a chance.
The women were certainly rooted, and they seemed to be the force behind the men.
A bit of clown, Gordon. Get into the kitchen and make some coffee.
Stella was very much behind Dennis Lawson's character, and Marina is a force unto herself, and certainly was the object of Peter Capaldi's character's desire.
If you look at the characters in his films, women play a very, very specific role, and men in his films are kind of dolts a lot of the time. They're kind of...
Women are much more centred. They're much more generous with the way they look at the world, and at the same time they're much more, self-centred as well. They've got it all, they've got it all going.
Between the two women, they were like every man's ideal women. If you could have got both those women into one, then she would have just been superwoman.
What lovely long eyelashes you've got.
I never really believed in the film that he is genuinely in love with Stella. I always just think that it's part of this little idyll that he thinks he sees and would like to have it for himself.
Mac is certainly confused. Is life in Furness all that it seems? Is it mere coincidence that the fishing village is entered through a mist, like its ghostly ancestor Brigadoon? Forsyth scattered his film with tantalising clues to a world of myth and legend.
The film has many emblematic or mythic images, and it uses the mythology of Scottish storytelling, and one of those mythologies is the Brigadoon idea. And the phone box represents a tunnel to the outside world. But on another level, it's also where some of the funniest things happen.
That was a telephone call from America. There's a Mr. Harper coming to see you here. Harper? Yes. Happer. Spelt it for me.
Of course, Mac's relationship with Happer down the phone while the Aurora Borealis is happening. So the phone box is central to the action.
It's like a shower of colour. Tell him it's the Aurora Borealis. I have some more information, sir. It's the Aurora Borealis.
Holy mackerel. What's happened?
It's just the northern lights. Aurora Borealis. High-energy protons spilling over into our atmosphere.
You say the darndest things, Marina.
I remember I met Bill in London and we talked about the supernatural. I remember he was very thoughtful and rather twinkly, and there was a sort of otherworldly quality about him. Whether I think that sort of infuses the film.
I think Bill was very keen that the Marina character was a real mermaid, in the sense that physically she had to be the way that a human being would have evolved to be able to swim underwater, as opposed to having a big tail and all this stuff.
Well, obviously she was some kind of fairy creature. You know, you have this thing in Scotland, this legend of the Silkies, who are like seal women, and they come ashore and they marry humans, and they can, you know, sometimes they drown the humans, and the humans follow them into the sea and all that sort of thing. And it's an old legend, and I think Bill must have had that in his mind for the character.
And there's almost a moment where you think you see a tail, which can't be. Well, I know it wasn't, because there was no tail there, but because she performs like a seal or a dolphin or something. I swear I saw a tail.
She is absolutely the spirit of Scotland, but you can be a human form in the spirit of Scotland, or you can be a sort of otherworldly body, and I'm just going to stop there.
With the other spirit of Scotland flowing freely, Gordon tries to close the deal for the sale of the village. But as the ceilidh gets underway, Mac's heart just isn't in it anymore.
I say what? Let's haggle. Haggle?
The music has such a powerful effect in the film. I think it was great to bring it to the fore and for people to start to hear. And I think that was the first time we heard the theme, as it were, of the film, which is played on the whistle.
The theme tune's one of these things that you just always remember. You know, again, even if you've never seen the film, you'd always remember the music from it.
David Puttnam had enjoyed great success counterpointing Vangelis's modern electronic score with the Palm Court trappings of Chariots of Fire. Dire Straits were lording it over the charts in the early 80s, and Puttnam felt that a score by frontman Mark Knopfler would work as successfully on Local Hero.
Bill was initially quite sceptical, except, thank God, Telegraph Road. Mark's song Telegraph Road, Bill loved. And somehow, as a result of talking about Telegraph Road, he and Mark developed a shorthand, if you like, or a way of thinking about the film that began to work. Also, once Bill knew that Mark came from Newcastle and was not a kind of soft Londoner, I think he was a lot more comfortable.
It was stunningly beautiful. The quality of light at that time of the year is breathtaking. And then, of course, you've got the magic hour. And I do remember some scenes where we were rushing around, Chris Menger's on camera. You know, we've got literally an hour to shoot this whole sequence for the light.
The thing is, whatever we do, I'm afraid we're going to have to do really quickly because it's going to shut down in 15 minutes.
Right. I think this is what Bill captures really amazingly in the film, is the gloaming. Because unless you've actually experienced the gloaming, it's not something you can describe to someone, really. You can relay to them what it's like, but you can't, until you've actually been there and seen it for yourself, it's impossible to empathise with what it's like to stand on a beach in the gloaming.
Mac's excited telephone box reports aren't enough for Happer. He has to see these Scottish skies for himself.
Sort of fluke, but it was an inspired fluke. It was Chris Minger's idea. And that was the arrival of the helicopter, which by use of music and sound and light, we managed to make look like a kind of cosmic experience. Happer spent his life looking at the stars, and Mac started looking at the Aurora Borealis and all that's going on. And then all of a sudden you've got a combination of Aurora Borealis and the stars and Happer, and he arrives as if on a cosmic spaceship.
Local Heroes Climax takes place on the beach, when a menacing mob of villagers converge on Ben's shack. Only the arrival of Happer's helicopter diffuses the ugly situation.
This is Mr. Happer. He'd like to talk with you.
The next day, Happer and Ben meet, but the American invader is on Ben's territory, where money counts for nothing.
Mr. Happer is from America, like me.
America, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Well then, Mr.
Happer.
Happer, is it? Well, you'd better come in if you've come that far.
Well, thank you, sir. Oh.
I think one of the great things Bill did was absolutely refusing to go inside Ben's shack.
That'll be all for now, McIntyre.
To find out what they were talking about. That he allowed us to be on the outside wondering what on earth these two men could possibly be talking about.
If you can get your audience to imagine the story they think they're being told, but which in fact they're telling themselves, then you've accomplished something.
I think that was genius, because you're completely satisfied that they've found common ground.
To tell you the honest truth, when I was writing it, I just couldn't imagine what they would say to each other. And I thought, how can I get the idea that these two people are bonded, you know? So I thought, yeah, well, it's their bonding, let them go on with it. We'll stay outside and they can bond in that little set there.
When Happer finally emerges, Ben has persuaded him to fulfill his passion for the stars and build an observatory instead of an oil refinery, to which Danny adds an idea which will enhance his chances with Marina.
This is a natural place for a marine laboratory. We've already prepared some data at the Aberdeen lab. The North Atlantic drift, it comes right in here.
Sea and sky. I like that.
And as for poor old Mac, he's torn from his Scottish idyll and packed off back to Houston.
Is that the Yank in that thing, Edward?
Aye, Peter. That's him away.
Ah, bugger it. I meant to say cheerio.
For the cast of Local Hero, 12 unforgettable weeks in Scotland were over. Peter Capaldi went on to win an Oscar for his short film Franz Kafka's It's a Wonderful Life, which he wrote and directed. He worked with Alex Norton again on TV in The Crow Road and mastered swearing to play Malcolm Tucker in BBC Two's The Thick of It.
Don't fucking get... Look, half an hour ago you were in with a shot. We're fucking time travelled, yes? We're in a weird and wonderful world where everything is different. Maybe outside the polar ice caps have melted. Maybe there's fucking robots knocking about and Davina McCall's a new pop. Maybe you can download rice.
Dennis Lawson played Wedge Antilles in the Star Wars series and directed Peter Capaldi in Solid Geometry before earning a place as a Holby City regular. Jenny Seagrove worked again with Fulton Mackay on the TV miniseries Diana and recently on stage with John Gordon Sinclair in Absurd Person Singular, but is currently best known as Joe Mills in Judge John Deed. Peter Riegert was Oscar nominated in 2000 for By Courier, a movie he wrote, produced and directed, and has recently appeared in Damages. But the story of Local Hero wasn't allowed to end with Mac returning to Houston. Warner Brothers and Goldcrest hadn't finished with it yet.
Bill and I were offered a lot of money when it was finished to change the ending.
Originally the movie was going to end with me in my apartment back in Houston, listening to the sounds of the city.
Basically, the studio, their feeling was we could have a runaway mega success if it had a more of an upbeat ending, you know. And what they basically wanted us to do was have McIntyre come back to the village, be embraced by his mates, marry a local girl. I mean, they wanted a very, very upbeat ending.
And Bill said, "It's not going back in my movie. The movie is about something else. He doesn't get to fulfill this fantasy." David Puttnam had said to Bill, "Listen, we've got to give them something."
What's that goes in there?
Bill remembered that he had a shot of the village with the telephone booth in the midground. So they added that shot and put the sound of a telephone ringing. And Warner Brothers found it acceptable, so that became the ending.
Despite the new ending and a few cuts, Local Hero remained largely as Bill and David had imagined it. But had they been right to fight for their version of the film, how would moviegoers and critics judge it?
BAFTA, we did well, but I mean, Bill won Best Director. I lost to, I think, I have to say, might as well say this now, wrongly, we lost to the Lewis Gilbert film, Educating Rita. It's a better film than Educating Rita.
There was an interesting local reaction to Local Hero. I was more or less selling out to the screen mythology that Scotland had developed, you know, in terms of Hollywood movies like Brigadoon. To my mind, I was subverting as much as I knew about that genre, but I still took quite a bit of flack for it.
The US was exactly what Warner Brothers said it would be. It was extremely respectable, very, very well reviewed, very well, much loved. It didn't go through the roof, and maybe they're right. Maybe if we'd made the changes they wanted to, it would have done, but we wouldn't be talking about it today. That's the interesting thing. We're talking about a film which is a kind of classic movie. It's a classic movie because it's got absolute integrity. If we'd done what they wanted it to do, it would be another film that people would have been made, shot, forgotten.
Instead, Local Hero is a legacy of Bill Forsyth's vision, shielded up by the persuasive skills of David Puttnam. David did win a BAFTA for The Killing Fields and produced the Oscar-nominated The Mission, whose crew included Chris Menges and Ian Smith. He was appointed head of Columbia Pictures in 1986 and in 1997 received a life peerage. Bill Forsyth collected a BAFTA for Comfort and Joy, making Peter Capaldi's dad his ice cream consultant before David Puttnam persuaded him to go to Hollywood to make Housekeeping and Breaking In. Back in Scotland, he teamed up with John Gordon Sinclair again on Gregory's Two Girls, but nothing seems to have quite recaptured the thrill of making Local Hero.
I got to know the cinema manager down at the local Odeon, and I used to pop in sometimes and just see the last 10 minutes or whatever. And that was the most consummate kind of experience as a filmmaker that I've had, is actually standing at the back of a room, listening and watching people, you know, enjoy what you've done.
And like the story of Ben's Beach itself, the making of Local Hero could be seen as victory for the individual soul over big business bucks.
It's genuinely full of Bill Forsyth, I think.
I think it's wonderfully executed. I don't think there's one superfluous scene or line.
A big Hollywood star in the lead. And great casting all round, great story. Everything just gelled.
There's no shot of me calling back. If you want it to be McIntyre calling up, it's McIntyre calling up.
A female stalker, a private eye, and a bunch of rowdy squaddies. Pauline Quirk leads an all-star cast on a walk to Arthur's Dyke, next on BBC One.
I don't think he realises